Hello, everybody, dear participants of this opening panel. Welcome to this digital round. I promise we will try to make it as exciting and interesting as possible in the digital space, even if we pity that we can't be in Berlin altogether. For those of you who have just joined us, I would like to introduce myself once again. My name is Prasanna Oommen, and I will be facilitating the opening talk and also guide you through this next 3 days of the festival Latitude launched by the Goethe-Institut. I'm a German based moderator, and I have been concerned for a long time in the field of reflecting the post colonial settings in German cultural institutions, and also with the question of how the perspectives and competencies of our post-migrant society in Germany are taken into account in these institutions. Now, I'm very pleased that the Goethe-Institut has invited three brilliant personalities for this opening panel. Together, we will try to set the topics of the festival and also transfer the experiences and views of our guests as a kind of base for the next 3 days. Let me now briefly introduce the three of them. It's really worth it. They are so impressive. First of all, I would like to welcome Nanjira Sambuli. She is a researcher, policy analyst, and advocacy strategist for information and communications technology. She advises the World Economic Forum, and she has served as a manager at the World Wide Web Foundation and held functions at the UN on digital cooperation and women's economic empowerment. Born and raised in Kenya, Nanjira was named one of the, and I think that's really impressive, one of the most influential 100 Africans in 2016. And BBC's 100 Inspiring and Influential Women in 2019. Above all, that she's a strong voice for the impact of technology on society and for digital equality, always taking into account questions of gender and identity. On her website, she describes herself as perched at the intersection of tech with governance, media, and culture. This multifaceted approach will very much widen the horizon of our debate and surely lead us to some very, what I like, hands-on questions. Thank you, dear Nanjira, for being here with us today. My next guest is the inspiring Nikita Dhawan. Nikita studied at the University of Mumbai, did her PhD in Bochum, Germany, taught in Costa Rica, Australia, the US, Spain, South Korea, Austria, and South Africa. Now she is a professor of political science and gender studies here in Germany at the University of Gießen. Nikita Dhawan is one of the principal voices in the post-colonial discourse in Germany. Her work centers around transnational approaches to justice and democracy. If you want to Google her, actually all of my guests today, you will find the most interesting and challenging speeches and interviews on the central topics of this festival Latitude on YouTube and other channels. Nikita Dhawan uses post-colonial and queer theory to challenge established concepts. She's an advisor for Femina Politica, a magazine for feminist political science. And she received the Käthe Leichter Award in 2017 for outstanding achievements in support of gender studies and the women's movement. As we will speak about identity, the role of culture for democracy and global inequalities, Dhawan is a guarantor to open up alternative perspectives and ask challenging questions, which I'm very much looking forward to. I'm glad, dear Nikita, that you could join us today. Welcome. And last but not least, I would like to introduce another important guest for our conversation today. He is a professor for French and Romance philology, but mainly known as a brilliant philosopher. Souleymane Bachir Diagne creates an understanding for the influence of philosophy on our beliefs and actions, and for the decolonization of philosophical concepts. Born in Senegal, he received his academic training at the Sorbonne in France, taught philosophy in Senegal, and he is now department chair at the Columbia University, New York. This transnational career translates to his work. Souleymane Bachir Diagne wrote about Pakistani poet philosopher Muhammad Iqbal, Senegalese president and cultural theorist, now excuse my pronunciation, Leopold Sédar Senghor, English logician George Boole, as well as French philosopher Henri Louis Bergson. I'm sure Souleymane will contribute important impulses on post-colonialism, transcultural connections, and also, very important, on the restitution of cultural goods. Welcome to all three of you. So now we will start immediately with the discussion because now it's your turn to talk. The focus of the festival is the question of how colonial structures still affect Western structures and how these can be overcome today. One of the main issues is the relevance of art for our civil society and its mostly unreflected post-colonial setting. It would be great if we can impart your perspectives, which we can follow up and negotiate during this festival from a bigger view up to the details. Souleymane, the first question is how arts institutions and cultural policy are still affected by racism and a missing collective memory. Can you describe the effects of colonialization until today with a specific focus on the art world, which is always important for us?
Well, let me look at it this way. The relationship between colonialism and artwork is obviously multifaceted. So let me take the historical angle first and looking at the way in which African art, for example, was captured during colonial time. As we know, colonialism meant also looting, that is the word to be used here, looting African art, taking African art into European ethnographic museum in the first place, and keeping them there, storing them as ethnographic curiosities. Before that, African art, classical African art, was seen differently, mainly by poets and painters and artists within Europe, European painters and artists and poets, etc., and then started producing the power, so to say, of the message encapsulated in their very visual language. So the relationship between African art and colonialism was a very close relationship right from the beginning. First of all, in the looting of African art, taken from Africa, taken to European museum, and then the change in meaning, the new translation of African art in some kind of modern artistic language, which was called, and rightly so, primitivism, because what was the interest of these artists and poets looking at African art was to look at what they considered somehow the infancy of humanity, the primitive, naive way of painting and sculpting, etc., etc. So it looks like until now, African art has to be decolonized. In other words, has to produce its own narrative about itself. In other words, these objects that have been the object of two different discourses. The first discourse that considered their ethnographic curiosities. The second one that thought, oh, maybe there is here an artistic language that would be of interest for us. Now it is time to reach the decolonized discourse where these objects are going, so to say, to speak from themselves. We are at a time when we need them to have to say their own narrative, and this is why I would summarize my answer in one word: decentering. The center of art is still Europe. This is the time when decolonizing means also decentering and recentering these objects on themselves.
This is a perfect bridge to my next question. Thank you very much. Nanjira, you were nodding. Nikita was nodding. Actually, we are talking about eye level, same height of eye level regarding criteria. So how should art reflect the global injustice regarding eye level, Nanjira, production conditions, which is also one of your issues, and criteria for valuable art? It's all about values also, no? It's about access to the market. It's about who is deciding what.
Well, I'd start by arguing there should be no such strictures on the role of art. I think we need to rehabilitate our thinking on art, and especially beyond the notion that art is about artivism or activism, it's art. So that just as much as it can reflect global injustice, so it should reflect imaginaries for what a just society or just societies look like, how we can use art to help in designing alternative futures that are inclusive. And in fact, on this particular topic and its intersection of digital technologies, the following panel that we will have on reimagining the internet will bring some very practical examples of what we're seeing and how artists are trying to claim digital technologies to recreate what we understand as the role of art. Just as related is this question on who decides what will be shown where and when. I think it highlights just how much reflection there needs to be on the structures and institutions that shape how society is ordered today. Why those particular structures, why those institutions that lead us to places where we ask these questions? For me, these are the questions that I'm trying to sit with, and I would like to invite a lot more people to sit with. What are these assumptions that are driving this, and how are they arrived at? You know, how is it that some actors get to decide what will be shown, where, and when? Why? You know, who determines value, visibility, and so on and so forth. So before we even try to answer the question, I think the questions are invalid because they fundamentally, and we're living through a time where we fundamentally have to re-question these issues.
Nanjira, I'm very grateful that you mentioned this question of representation, and this leads me to Nikita, because Nikita, I have seen one of your really wonderful performances in 2018, I think, at the UDK, when you had Angela Davis and Gayatri Chakravarti on your podium, on your panel, and I was so happy watching it because on YouTube, because it was touching this question of representation. Who is talking on the panels about these issues? Can you just tell me, why are the panels still? I mean, it addresses exactly this issue. Why are the panels still dominated by white or Western protagonists? Is it, and we often hear this answer, we don't find anybody else. We can't find anybody who's qualified. It is a very, I mean, we are all bored by this answer, but still, it is a still common answer. So what is the reason? Is it a lack of people or lack of will? I mean, it's very provocative, and you can't, I know that you can't answer lack of people, but still, it would be great if you describe a little bit the issue.
Thank you, Prasanna, for the wonderful question, and thank you for the kind introduction. I also would like to take the opportunity to thank the organizers for putting together this very exciting festival, which we all look forward to in the next 3 days. And despite the difficult conditions, I think they've done a great job bringing all of us together. So congratulations and thank you very much. I'm also very excited to be on the panel with Souleymane and Nanjira. And I can only reinforce what they've already said so wonderfully and eloquently. I'll try and address your very important but also difficult question using 3 points. So first of all, just as Souleymane said, that colonialism is not just about economic exploitation and military occupation, but also epistemic violence. I mean, the way he very well illustrated using the example of African art as a point of departure, it's about colonization of the mind. And that's on both sides of the colonial divide. And accordingly, decolonization is not just about formal transfer of power and declaration of independence, although, of course, that is also important, as we see as being celebrated in Nairobi in Kenya right now, today. But it's also about a global redistribution of agency and sharing of power towards post-imperialist futures. And here, of course, the question of representation is extremely important. Who speaks for whom, on whose behalf, using what kind of vocabulary. And here, of course, including the vernacular and pluralizing the discourse is very important. At the same time, we have to be careful that the vernacular is not automatically a site of subversion, because the vernacular reproduces and consolidates its own relations of power. So yes, we need to pluralize and diversify and make these spaces heterogeneous, but at the same time, critique without self-critique is incomplete. So I think it's very important, while we critique Eurocentrism, we critique androcentrism, we critique heterocentrism, that post-colonial queer feminist perspectives always already also questions its presumptions. The other point that I'd like to address is, because this I think is at the core of what we're going to be discussing in the next couple of days, is the question of art and art institutions. It's a fundamental question. And here I think a historical perspective that was offered by Souleymane and also addressed by Nanjira is very important, that considering the historical role of art in colonial and fascist regimes, one needs to be careful when one, puts faith and in the promise of art as being an important site for the task of decolonization. Now here I have to think about Adorno's, opening lines in aesthetic theory, where he asks about the Existenzrecht der Kunst. He asks about the very right to exist of art. And he has this very controversial assertion that there can be no poetry after Auschwitz. Which bears witness to the disillusionment with the promise of art and artists as avant-garde, as agents of transformation. And it's a struggle with the question: how could a land of Bach and Goethe and Kant enable the likes of Hitler, Goebbels, and Eichmann? How could a society with such sublime poetry, music, art, literature, and philosophy commit such heinous crimes against humanity? And given, this is the historical perspective, but given that art functions within structures of capitalism and neocolonialism, one has to see how it, in a certain way, perpetuates global structures of inequality. And particularly, and this is my last point to wrap up my intervention, given the current pedagogical turn in art, there's this whole celebration of art as the connection between aesthetics and politics and ethics. I think that we need to revisit Adorno's warning about autonomous art, where he says that, he has this very, again, controversial, provocative statement, better no art than socialist realism, where he encourages us to rethink the question of autonomy of art. So I'd like to end with drawing on one of my favorite metaphors, the Derridian Spivatian metaphor of pharmacon. And I think art and artists are like pharmacon. They can be both poison as well as medicine. And the challenge is how to convert poison into medicine.
When you say that, it's a pretty difficult position, because the next question, I just wanted to add one more question. I was thinking, do you see a chance of Europe's others to unite their struggles or even create intersections with the global South? So if we talk about this, it sounds a little bit unsolvable. Nikita, it's still, this question is still for you.
Okay, I just wanted to clarify if I... The thing is that you have to be careful, because, I'm trained as a philosopher like Souleymane, and the philosophers love to talk. This is my standard joke. But we just I wrote my PhD on silence. I wrote 400 pages on silence. Talk about performative contradictions. So I do tend to give long answers, but I'll try and keep it short because this is a question that I am struggling with. Just like I'm sure Souleymane and Nanjira also. We all have. We all come from the global south. We are located in the global north sometimes in the global south because of our biographies. My parents are in Bombay, so I'm very, very often also in India. And the question of global solidarity is, of course, a very difficult question to respond. And it kind of connects to what Nanjira also and also Souleymane said about, questions of where the site of decolonization is. And particularly given the, transnationalization of public spheres today, we're talking about virtual public spheres. I was just talking earlier to a friend who was asking me about, what was happening in response to George Floyd's death, murder. And she's based in India and is not a particularly politicized person. And she was even inquiring about it. So here one sees also the transnationalization of discourse of public spheres. And this, of course, is extremely encouraging, whether it's, the Me Too movement, which has universalized in a certain way. And at the same time, I think that we have to also see the lures and limits of this transnationalization of public sphere and how there are certain how should I put it? I don't want to be, as one says in German, the Spielverderberin. I don't always want to play the devil's advocate, but I think we have to be very careful about these articulations of transnational solidarity because we know that these forms of violence are happening globally, world over, and how certain sites, in a certain way, how should I put it? From certain sides, it's easier to mobilize transnational solidarity than from other sides.
Okay. I mean, this is one, this leads exactly. Thank you very much, Nikita. I just interrupt. Sorry for the interruption.
No worries.
Because this leads me to this question about economic inequality and economic, also digital inequality in Nanjira. Does this whole question about economic inequalities towards when you view the whole globe directly leads to digital inequality, and what does it mean for our discussion, for our subject of justice and equality in the arts? Because look at this festival, we don't know who's going to be able to participate,
precisely,
who has access.
Precisely. I mean, and it's even a question for somebody like me who has the access and who probably would have been able to make it to Berlin, to think about what that looks like for somebody else, maybe right next door. What kinds of access would they have had to this festival? And of course, I hope that in 2020 we can finally make it known, and especially this pandemic gives us an opportunity for everybody to understand digitalization does not advance in a vacuum, nor are technical developments immune to the antecedents that shape them. So that even the question of economic inequalities in and of themselves, they're more than just about access to the market, because we've been conditioned to think that the market is this holy grail that serves us everything that we should be having in society. And so the internet, for that matter, is more than just about access to it. There's about the quality of access, the meaningful access, what you can actually appropriate from it and what you can create on it as well. So it's one thing I always like to say, and especially where the question of economics comes in, is that not everything that matters is measured, and not everything that is measured matters. And this moment is showing us exactly that. We do need to sit with this discomfort and decide for ourselves, when we talk about economics, can we start factoring in all the other things that have not been measurable or considered valuable to the market economies that shape today? Because that's exactly what is advancing towards what we are seeing as digitalization today. Those who had access were able to probably transition to working remotely, Zooming, and other things. But those who did not have access have been left behind, have been dealt yet another blow. They're probably dealing with the intersection of inequalities. They've probably been left out of access to income that would afford them the devices and the internet to be part of this conversation, or any other conversation for that matter. So no one should ever think digital is this cute little thing that has fallen from the heavens, the skies. It's not this big bang. It's absolutely shaped by the actors, the processes that already exist in society.
Thank you so much, Nikita. Souleymane, when you hear that, and you're a philosopher, and I have this very simple question. Are we still talking about sensitizing, especially the global north? Or how can, put it in a different way, how can philosophy help?
Well, maybe we do not probably need to sensitize the global north, or at least we need that less than we need to organize, to have our own creative energy focus on ourselves. Let me come back to the example of art that we were discussing earlier, and I totally agree with what has been said by Nikita on that aspect. Let's take a very concrete example. Something was happening on the African continent, which was very important just before this pandemic stopped it. It is this wonderful traveling exhibition called, in French, the French original title is Prête-moi ton rêve, which could be translated as Lend Me Your Dream. Lend Me Your Dream was an initiative coming from three prominent African artists, Abdoulaye Konate from Mali, Yakuba Konate from Ivory Coast, and other artists. And 30 of the greatest artists of the African continent came together, created something in Casablanca, and this exhibition, Prête-moi ton rêve, Lend Me Your Dream, was supposed to travel from Casablanca to Dakar, which it did. I was in Dakar in January, and I was able to see it. And it traveled from Dakar to Abidjan, but it had to stop there. So this is when the pandemic happened. But why am I saying this? Because this is an initiative that was coming from inside the Global South, which was a South-South type of collaboration. In this case, it was just Africans from different African countries, but one can perfectly imagine that it would be also, artists from everywhere, included the Global North, because there is no reason why you would not have on the topic of migration, on the topic of dreaming tomorrow, which was the general topic of this exhibition. You would not. There is no reason why you would not have this convergence between the Global South and the North, etc., etc. But the important aspect is that it was generated from inside the continent. It was funded even from inside the continent, and it was traveling inside the continent and was being seen by an African audience. In other words, in this particular case, you are not just saying that something exists or acquires universality if it is seen in the North and bear the stamp of approval from the North, from Northern institutions. So this is the whole thing. In other words, instead of trying to sensitize the North, etc., and this is what we did in the pandemics as well. During this pandemic, we have to remember, you had all these apocalyptic discourses about what is going to happen when the virus reaches the African shores. This idea that it is going to be the disaster and so on and so forth. Until now, and I knock on wood, this has not happened. But the main aspect of it is that the continent has decided that it was on its own. It had to mobilize its own internal energy. While more developed countries were fighting for masks coming from China and, outbidding each other in terms of the bigger check to be written to get the mask instead of the other one, African tailors just decided to make their own masks and to just use their own means. And this is what the whole thing is about. And I agree totally with what Nikita just said. Instead of always blaming and looking at outside what is being done, etc., we should be recentering on ourselves in the first place, then this recentering is also a way of opening to the rest of the world as well.
Mm-hmm. But thank you so much. Is this isn't that the bridge to the Salvin Saar report, actually, where they say it's a question of morality to give back any stolen works, any stolen artwork to the places of origin? Is this the real reason? Because it has to be there where it is originated, where it has originated from?
Exactly. And I'm very happy that you are using the very word morality. And one should be paying attention. Their report has become a book about restitution, but people have paid more attention to the word restitution than to the subtitle of the book, which is about new ethical relations. In other words, restitution is not just transferring back. It is not just a transportation. You are not just taking from one locality to another and then taking it back. There is no way, in a way, these objects are going to come back. If by coming back, you just understand that from a location, they are coming back to another location. They have produced new meanings. They have displayed new meanings in their new location when they became European. When they are repatriated to places where they were missing, they are not just going to fill a place that was left void when they left. They are going again to create new meanings. And beyond that, they are going to create new relationships between different museums in different locations and different places. In other words, restitution of these objects is also a way of reestablishing new links, new relationships between these objects and the multiple significance and meanings that they have carried during their long journey back and forth, and also reinventing new relationships between museums in the north and museums in the south. So this is the task, and this is the significance we should be giving to this very word restitution. So it is first a matter of morality. Obviously, you have to give back if you have seized these objects and just pull them out of the place where they belong to take them in ethnographic museums. That's one aspect of the ethical meaning of restitution. The other one is, how do we make sure that these objects, with all the meanings they are carrying now, are going to produce new ethical relationships with the North, between the North?
Yes. Mandy Sanger, I don't know if you know her, from the Cape Town District Museums. I don't know, she's the head of education there. And she was talking about a socio-historical perspective, that this object should, provide a socio-historical perspective, but also talk about the violence which came with it. Nikita, do you think this is what Souleymane also described? Is this the way we should look at it, at restitution of objects?
Absolutely. I'll very briefly supplement what Souleymane said, because he's more or less covered it so well. I just say that, of course, it's very, very important to restitute the objects, and it's a part of undoing the historical wrongs. But I think that, and exactly what Souleymane said, that restitution or reparation is much more than just the capitalist idea of, return to rightful owners. And I think that what Europe needs to do is take also responsibility for the historical crimes of colonialism. I mean, let's take the case of Germany. It has till date refused to apologize for the Herero-Nama genocide. And in its defense, Germany keeps saying that it gives development aid to Namibia. I mean, one is just left speechless in the face of this kind of cynical attitude. I absolutely, I can only, just completely reinforce what Souleymane said, that um, there are three terms that is used: restitution, reparation, and reconciliation. And um, if we want to, in a certain way, nurture new forms of ethical relationship between Europe and the non-European world, then it's extremely important that Europe takes seriously the historical violence that it has committed over centuries and continues to do presently.
Nanjira, you were nodding and you were rolling with
Yes.
your eyes. So you please react, because I always like if we have also this link, because it's a very important issue you raised, this link between development aid and the non excuse. Whatever excuse is a little bit small.
We could go into that forever. And, listening to Nikita,
I know.
On the point of even just restitution and reparation, even before reconciliation, is while Europe might take its time, or Europe, or any just powers that have been that felt that at some point, let's just go foray into other lands, that it's your time, on your time is when you'll do it. Because I think about what's happening today with the state of even education and historical education, both in the North and the South, and how the history of colonialism is taught. It's on one hand, it's really encouraging to see in countries like England, for example, where students, and mostly those who have, who are children of the diaspora, especially from the global South, are the ones leading the charge that they need to see another form of history being taught about these periods. You'll talk about World War II as if it was just about this issue. Well, the violence and the Cold, everything, and even before that, had very violent sites outside of these European tweefs, if you want to call them that. To date, we still see statues of colonizers being celebrated in certain capitals in Europe as heroes. And then you see it even now.
I know. We are discussing it all the time. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's one thing. That's the job right now that does need to happen in Europe. It does need to be a conversation. It's not just about us from elsewhere just coming with barriers and saying, please talk about this. It's very important that that's part of the work on allyship and solidarity and building these bridges that we absolutely need. But there's also the part of where even in this beloved development aid, I was just thinking about it today, and I was like, with, for example, German Development Corporation, there's a lot of focus on prioritization of STEM, that's science, technology, education, mathematics. They support the sciences in that regard. And what's called the TVET, the Technical and Vocational Education and Training. You see billions of euros being put to that kind of development corporation. Art is still being left on this charitable, sort of like on the sidelines kind of thing. And this, by the way, has shaped what we're seeing as neocolonial and post-colonial societies, and the role of art, even how art is prioritized in public policies, both by countries here to the work that we have to do, but also in how the support that comes from the West. And this goes back, for example, to the 80s, where structural adjustment programs came and completely obliterated what education systems were about. So there's still the ongoing work till today that has kept most of the structures in place. And so we do have to, these conversations are very uncomfortable, but they have to keep happening, because we have to keep shedding the light on how it keeps morphing. And the work that we have to do, it's not just going to be about one thing. There's so many catalytic effects that have to be taken into account. And now we're entering the era of digitalization, where we could embed these things further and create further divides, or we could use it to actually as a moment that helps us rebuild all these aspirations. We know what we need to do, that hopefully this can help us start doing this.
When you say we know what we need to do, I just wanted to ask you, can you just summarize 3 to 5 steps? What should be done? What is absolutely necessary? I just, you see, I'm cheating a little bit. I don't want to look into this whole recording again, because I have these 3 brains here all collected. So 3 to 5 steps. We Germans, we love these guides,
Yeah,
we have 3 to 5 steps, which we have to, which, it's called Leitfaden. We write a lot of Leitfäden right now, which means a guide for diversity management, also in arts and culture. So
one thing I hope,
especially when you look at the German context, especially Nikita, you are working in Germany right now. So we always want to try to transfer also the international discourse to the German context. What should be done regarding inequalities, regarding restitution, regarding also this ongoing othering of subaltern groups.
I just want to jump in there because my mic is still unmuted.
Yes, definitely.
And say that
specifically,
I'm glad you zeroed it on Germany. I'm as an observer and somebody who loves Germany and comes and I see how you see it in certain, there's this inquiry, and that's why we're in this festival and having this conversation. But there's the problematic that now I have to come in there and give you a guide, or we have to create a curriculum on how we're going to decolonize. Some of these things don't lend themselves to these structural ways, so that that's the most difficult and not very liked answer amongst different sectors in German society. Not everything will lend itself nicely to this technical guided molds. In fact, because part of what we're trying to do is break the molds and complicate equations and take in various perspectives. We're going into an era where we do need to question why these silos exist. I mean, I can get a technical silo to sharpen knowledge. It's another thing to say that that's the only way we're going to see society. These are the ontological questions that we need to bring in so many other perspectives. Now, to say that to the German audience, to leave them confused, but I think it's important. We have the mental capacity, we have the knowledge, even if it's not, all the archives are not necessarily representative. Start there, sit with these discomforts. It's part of how you help us do that, because I really struggle with the labor being on me to give you help or to let you know what to do. And when I know for sure, when we go out there tomorrow, rinse and repeat, it will be back to the same structures of what have been happening. So I just say my one request, my one hope, my one dream is people can just sit with the discomfort a lot longer, not looking for answers just because it's the easy way out.
Yeah, because there's not a simple solution for all this baggage also from all sides. Thank you so much, Nanjira. This is not the final statement. We have still a little bit time left. Nikita, you're still muted.
Well, I'm just going to repeat what Nanjira said, but I'm just going to use other words. So I think that this kind of what is to be done, this famous question that Lenin asks, and this textbook of how to lead one's life, how to do ethics, to use a word that Souleymane used, how to repair relations. I think there is some comfort in having a 10-point program. I mean, because perhaps mostly it will be a German audience. This Dr. Oetker's recipe. So Dr. Oetker is a very famous condiment company, and this Dr. Oetker's recipe of how to save the world in 10 steps. I think it's very attractive, and yet I think it's a kind of also lazy politics, because one doesn't want to use a word that Nanjira used, go through the discomfort of thinking for oneself. And there's a wonderful play that Derrida does with Lenin's question, where he says, what is to be done, with the question, what is to be done? And he says, what kind of expectations are attached to this question when you say what is to be done? And the answer that you expect from the respondent. And I think to go back to the question of formulas and guidelines and blueprints to decolonize, to make art institutions more effective, to rethink the relationship between aesthetic, politics, and ethics. I think from a post-colonial queer feminist perspective, one of the things that needs to be done is to rethink our relationship to the master's tools. Audre Lorde very famously remarked, you cannot use the master's tools to dismantle the master's house. And whether we're talking about digital technology, whether we're talking about public spheres, whether we are talking about institutions like museums, whether we're talking about universities where some of us work, development politics, enlightenment norms of equality, secularism, constitutionalism, what kind of relationship do we have to the master's tools, and how can we recalibrate, reconsider, reimagine our relationship to the master's tools, so that perhaps there is hope and there is an opportunity to dismantle the master's house using the master's tools.
Thank you so much for this beautiful answer. And I think Dr. Oetker is in integration help, since my parents also came from India to this country and they couldn't bake. And so I learned with this 10 points, Dr. Oetker recipes. It was great, but it didn't taste very well. It's a very nice example Souleymane.
Well, that's a very difficult question. What needs to be done?
Yeah, I know.
And that's probably the.
I didn't expect a simple answer.
Question, of course, but let me rephrase it this way: what kind of word do we want to see happen? And that would be a way of answering the question: what needs to be done? What kind of work do we want to work for? Especially in light of all the lessons that we are drawing from these pandemics. We need a word of solidarity, a word of true partnership, and a word that is not just a bipolar word, a new form of Cold War between, on the one hand, the United States and the other hand, China. We need a multi-centered word, and I believe if I allow myself to say something about what Germany in particular should be doing, I think Germany should take more leadership in the shaping of that word. In a way, I have my sense when I look at things geopolitically is that Germany doesn't really play on a geopolitical level the role that she should be playing in a way, given her economic strengths and so on and so forth. Let's take the issue of art. On this particular aspect of art and restitution, Germany has taken the position of leadership. Of course, it started with the French president asked Felwine, my good friend Felwine, and my good friend Benedict to write this report, etc., etc. Germany was not sort of prompted that way, but in a way, Germany started to answer. And the answers by Germany about restitution, objects that have been already restituted, but more importantly, even the discussion that has been taking place in Germany showed a form of leadership of Germany in this particular situation. The same should be happening, I think, in the word that we are going to reconfigure geopolitically. We need a word where the notion of development is centered around values and human values, human life and humanity. The virus has revealed to us that for it, the whole planet is one single country. Well, let's behave like one single country in our response to it. Let's have what I like to call a politics of humanity. And a politics of humanity means that we have to rethink the whole notion of our development. We talk in terms of growth rates. And Africa has been seen under that light recently, before the pandemics, and now we are having probably socio-economic problems in Africa coming. But before that, the idea of Africa as the rising continent, and when people were saying, oh, these countries have this growth rate, etc., etc., arrives a pandemic like this, a crisis like this, and you are not talking anymore about your growth rate, you are talking about the number of masks. If the number of respirators or ventilators, how does your sanitary infrastructure is it able to sustain what happen, etc. So this is something we need to do, and I believe that in that direction, Germany has a leadership role to play that it is not playing. Germany is sort of restraining itself, I believe, in really taking responsibility on the geopolitical level and playing that role of participating in the reshaping of the world around values such as a true human development on the one hand, and also ecological development on the other hand. And I believe that
it's a very interesting perspective.
Would be interesting. Yeah.
A leadership role in also diversifying the discourse in the end. I mean, Germany is doing a lot in this, but there are different branches, and it is a difficult discussion. But what I liked is that you said a lot was happening because of this Macron's initiative, and something was set up also here, which is nice, but it's a very, also because of the political structure, it's a very, very complicated discussion. And we have a lot to deal with, a lot of discomfort, especially when it comes to structures and changing of structures in German institutions.
Prasanna, if I may just very, very briefly say a few words. Very
yes,
briefly.
Of course.
I just was wondering, and it's more a question than an assertion, that perhaps Germany is reluctant to take this kind of leadership role also because of its history. Because führen, the German word to lead, is still has historical connotations and baggage. And I think that comes with its. I find it's an ambivalent situation, and I do think that it's in a sense positive that the Germans are reluctant to be. I won't use the German word, but I'll use the English word to lead. And at the same time, I understand where you're coming from. That given that there are given other countries which were seen as torchbearers of liberal democracy, and the disillusionment with these kinds of leaders, that there is a vacuum that has been created, and that there is an urgent need that this vacuum be filled. But I think that just to respond to your question, I think that Germany and Germans would be reluctant to play this kind of or take up this kind of leadership, given its historical, given its history and historical baggage.
And yes, I do have a question there. I mean, aren't there, because I love German because it has a word for everything. Aren't there words that can also step in? Because I think about the kind of leadership we need in the world, and I agree completely with Souleymane, that Germany has a role, even if it's not necessarily in the world, even within Europe, and the role of Europe and Europe's relationship with the world going forward, because till now it's almost always been a center and has always had to be centered in serving alongside others. See, that's the other thing, other ways of imagining. I see this even in technology right now, when conversations are about the same geopolitics, US, China, talking about leading in technology and what's the role of Europe. And I asked, policymakers in the EU and elsewhere, why do you have to play at the same geopolitical winner takes all, dichotomy, which is absolutely false? Why don't you create a new coalition of thinkers who say slow and steady wins the race, slow, sustainable.
It's about creating a platform.
Context appropriate wins the race. I think that's what Germans are very good at. I mean, there's an interesting risk aversion necessarily, which is not a bad thing. It's leaning into it and finding other language that shows it's not about being the leader with the torch. It's being about how do we co-lead? This world needs so many heads on the table. Why don't they help in building a new table that brings in so many other actors who've always been told they wait for what some decisions are made by Europeans or others? I think that's the kind of leadership we could really use from Germany.
We have this wonderful German word, which is called, in German, it's really complicated, multiperspektivisch, multi-perspective. It's in German, it's very complicated. It's not used all the time. It's everyday language. So, and I think it's exactly right. Talking about leading, führen, it's a difficult question. Also to claim this role, it's a difficult question in Germany, but moderating a process, enabling a process would be enabling a platform, building a platform, being the one who brings the different heads together could be definitely, I think that's a finding we can take out of this discussion, definitely. But now we are almost at the end, and I won't let you go without a final statement, because it is really, I mean, we just jumped from one topic to the next, but it was really, really still very full and rich. So one question I always have when I moderate this kind of festivals or congresses or whatever is, so what's the use? What do we do afterwards? Yeah, this is it's more a practical, a field question. So what I would like you to answer, if you can, what can a festival like this ideally achieve, especially during the pandemic? Think of it, it's the opening panel, so we need motivation, but we also need a little bit of guideline, perhaps for the next 3 days. What are we going to do with the findings afterwards? What is it good for? just a short. We have about 3 minutes, 4 minutes left, so you have to try to be brief. Try to be. Nanjira,
I suppose I can. Yeah, sure, I can go first. I hope it can help those who tune in, and especially maybe as a message for my brothers and sisters in the global north. The world, as has been ordered, has created this false zero-sum game that for us to gain anything as people of the South, it'll mean necessarily losing. There's some redistribution, reparation. There's enough for everyone to go around. I always say, even for my continent, it's not a poor continent, it's just a mismanaged one. So if we start thinking of the resources that the world has today and that we see that can help us do that. I always talk about humility. I find that it's a very important human value. If this festival helps even a person or two to start interacting with knowledge and insights that is not mediated through European or global northern institutions. We say in internet parlance, we've been new, we've always known, we've always spoken, we've always said. It's just that you've not necessarily had direct access. There'll be such a great array of, sessions that I've seen highlighted that will center mostly voices from the South. Tune in, listen while you're cooking, while you're running something. Just listen, just be willing, be open to hear from other perspectives and see what you can use to create a new understanding. And I think this is an imperative, a moral one for my generation and those to come who are still shaping their worldviews. We have to unlearn to relearn.
Thank you so much, Nanjira. Nikita, and then Souleymane is already muted. Souleymane.
Well, I think that one big lesson we have to learn from this is that we cannot just say that there is nothing that cannot be done. And the message of the festival should be, I believe, the message that we are drawing now from everything that is happening, the two different aspects of the crisis. First of all, human solidarity. I've talked about that.
Yeah.
Second, during these pandemics, we are seeing another virus, which is the virus of racism and inequality. This cop who killed a man and prevented him from breathing at a time when we are under attack by a virus which is attacking our own breathing capacity, which is our life itself, is emblematic of what our time is. And this is what we need to refuse. And the feeling of outrage that has been widespread, not only here, but also in Berlin, in London, and everywhere, is outrage against the word as it is, a word in which inequality meant inequality in the face of death. The people who are dying from this virus are disproportionately brown people of color. And this explains what inequality is. It is not just economic inequality, it is really inequality in front of life and death. And there is a lesson that art has about that. Art is a great equalizer in a way. And I think that this could be the one lesson of this festival. And I was so happy to participate in it and to be having this conversation with you, Nikita, and Julia as well.
Thank you so much for this final statement, Souleymane. Nikita.
Well, I can only, again, repeat what Nanjira and Souleymane have so eloquently said, that I'll try, and because I've already, outed myself, I have a tendency to give long answers, I'll restrict myself to 2 points. One is the politics of speaking and the politics of listening, both points that Nanjira and Souleymane raised. Regarding the politics of speaking, this festival is a wonderful platform which gives the opportunity to hear different voices. And at the same time, one has to be careful. This was something that Prasanna, you asked right in the beginning, offering a platform to people, voices from the global South, for people who usually are not heard in the global North. Of course, the pluralization and diversification that this platform offers is, of course, extremely important. And yet we have to be careful of what Sarah Emmett calls the non-performativity of diversity, whereby, we act as if, because there are people from the global South, they are speaking, that they're automatically being listened to. And I think speaking and listening are, as one says in German, zwei Paar Schuhe. They are two different activities. Just because somebody speaks doesn't mean that somebody is listened to. And I think in order to reorganize and reorder and reimagine the world, we need to nurture another politics of listening and another ethics of listening also. And I hope that this festival will train us to listen differently and to also develop a patience for that which is counterintuitive, to that which is uncomfortable, to that which makes us reconsider our comfort position. So I wish all of us a wonderful 3 days, lots of exciting and also difficult conversations. And once again, thank you to the organizers. Thank you, Prasanna, for your wonderful questions, and thank you to Souleymane and Nanjira. It was really very inspiring to discuss with you.
Thank you very much, Nikita. I think that was really, especially for developing cultural policies in this country, it was really all these findings or these final statements are really transferable to a practical level also, which is nice because solidarity, listening, also acting, who is going to act in terms of equality, all these questions are very practical, and we have to consider this, especially in these times where we are facing probably the cutting down of cultural budgets in the next few years, which will probably happen in the pandemic. So I think this is a very important final statement. And thank you so much to the three of us. I'm delighted. For me, it was great. I hope you had a good time. Thank you very much, dear audience. We pre-recorded this session, but I hope you can feel the vibes and this really interesting and highly, how can I say that, inspiring discussion. We would be delighted if you would accompany us during the next 3 days, especially with all these big words, which we now gave a little bit of impact in this 45 minutes or 60 minutes now. Bye-bye to the three of you. I see some of you again during these 3 days, and take care. See you hopefully soon also in Berlin for a next occasion, and take care. Bye-bye. Thank you.